May 6, 1945. The North Atlantic was a gray expanse, flat and cold, the horizon barely visible through a curtain of mist. The sea, once a theater of fury, now carried an uneasy quiet. On the surface, a lone U-boat, U-2501, broke the water like a dark steel shark reluctantly hauled into daylight. Its conning tower rose slowly, creaking with the strain of years beneath crushing pressure. Inside, the crew moved like ghosts in a tomb, each man weighed down by months of patrol, hunger, and fear. The diesel engines coughed their last, leaving only the rhythm of waves and the occasional groan of hull plating. Expectations had long been settled in their minds. Surrender meant humiliation, perhaps worse. Captain Heinz Richter, a man in his early 30s whose eyes had seen the Atlantic devour so many comrades, kept his hands on the railing, knuckles white. "They'll throw us in the brig and interrogate us," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Around him, the crew avoided eye contact, silent witnesses to a war they had lived in submariners' close quarters, a world of periscopes, sonar pings, and the constant, oppressive threat of depth charges. Over 70,000 German sailors had been trained to operate these lethal underwater predators. Nearly 30,000 would never see daylight again. The radio crackled a single, definitive instruction from Admiral Donitz. "Cease all hostilities. Surface immediately. Prepare to surrender to Allied forces." The order landed like an anchor in their minds. They were trained killers, creatures of the deep. Yet now, obedience meant stepping into the unknown without a weapon to hold. They climbed the narrow ladder to the deck, muscles stiff from confinement, boots scraping wet metal. Salt spray stung their eyes, mingling with the taste of unwashed mouths and the lingering odor of diesel oil. On the horizon, American destroyers emerged from the fog. From beneath the waterline, their guns looked menacing, bristling like steel teeth. But as they drew nearer, the expected fire did not come. The sailors froze, eyes flicking between each other and the distant silhouettes. Instead of orders to surrender shouted through megaphones or the flash of gunfire, American officers signaled them with calm, measured gestures. The first officer, a tall man with a clipped mustache and a crisp uniform, waved them toward the nearest deck. "It can't be that simple," muttered Richter, disbelief cracking his voice. Memories of comrades lost to depth charges and sudden surface attacks tugged at him. Yet step by step, they complied. The contrast was jarring. Months of training to strike swiftly, to evade, to kill, all the tactics of war, were replaced with instructions on how to climb safely onto a foreign ship and stand in formation. No violence, no retribution. American sailors greeted them not with hostility, but with procedural courtesy. Blankets were offered to shivering men, hot tea handed to the unaccustomed. One young German, barely 19, blinked at the steaming mug in his hands, as though it were a mirage. "Are they going to shoot us now?" he whispered to a comrade, who only shrugged, equally disbelieving. In the cramped steel coffin below, they had imagined interrogation rooms and cold cells. Above deck, they found neatly arranged mess tables and medical officers checking each man for frostbite or illness. For hours, the sailors moved between disbelief and cautious relief. They were photographed for records, names called aloud in clipped English, details meticulously recorded in logbooks. Every gesture of professionalism deepened the cognitive dissonance. Trained killers being treated with dignity by those who should have been their executioners. It was surreal, almost absurd, yet undeniably real. Even the sea seemed to acknowledge the irony, calm now, reflecting a pale sky that offered no comfort and yet a strange kind of peace. The historical record confirms such moments. U-2501 was one of more than 150 U-boats surrendering in early May 1945, and the American Navy maintained a strict adherence to humane treatment, consistent with Geneva Conventions. No known cases of lethal reprisals occurred during these surrenders, a fact that would astonish the men who had spent years submerged, surviving only through stealth and aggression. Memoirs from former U-boat commanders, including Eric Topp and Carl Friedrich Merton, recount their awe at such procedural civility, describing it as almost dreamlike after months of unrelenting tension. Amid the protocols, small human moments etched themselves into memory. A cigarette passed across deck rails, a shared joke about the weather, the astonished gratitude at receiving clean clothes, gestures both trivial and profound. Richter, standing rigidly as an American officer checked his logbook, allowed himself a faint smirk, a fleeting acknowledgement that the enemy could also be human. One sailor, arms trembling for months in confined, damp quarters, quietly thanked the medical officer for a bandage, his voice almost inaudible over the waves. And yet, tension lingered like a shadow. The men could not entirely shed the habits of war. Eyes darted nervously, hands instinctively brushed at invisible triggers. They had survived attacks that shredded steel and men alike, and still trust came hard. They marveled at the ordinariness of the sailors around them, their steady movements, the quiet efficiency that belied the deadly potential of their ships. Humor, too, crept in cautiously. One German muttered under his breath, after months of hiding from depth charges, "I get tea and biscuits instead of a torpedo to the bow." The irony was not lost. Those smiles were brief and nervous. By the day's end, the full scope of the surrender settled over the men like a fog. Their weapons were inert, their training a memory, yet they remained alive to witness that the world could behave unpredictably, even in war's final days. Something had shifted, subtly but irreversibly. Notions of honor, fear, and duty intertwined with a new, reluctant respect for their captors. Richter gazed over the calm water, feeling a strange release. In the vast Atlantic, a world once defined by pressure, darkness, and deadly intent had ended not with fire or steel, but with human decency. Still, the men knew this was only the beginning. Their war had ended, yes, but the consequences of surrender, the bureaucracy's interrogations, the uncertainty of survival beyond the ocean, awaited them. Yet, for the first time in months, they allowed themselves a cautious thought of relief. And in that suspended moment, with the gray horizon stretching endlessly, they had no choice but to step forward into a world that was both familiar and impossibly new. May 7, 1945. The Atlantic was quieter now, but not entirely peaceful. The fog lingered in rolling banks, and a pale sun struggled through, casting a muted light on the deck of the USS Agawam. U-2501, still tethered alongside, seemed smaller in daylight, its dark hull a stark contrast against the orderly lines of American warships. The German crew, huddled in their damp uniforms, scanned every motion with careful scrutiny, expecting hostility at any moment. Captain Heinz Richter's knuckles whitened around the railing, but something in the American formation suggested patience, almost deliberation. The American Admiral arrived mid-morning, a tall, lean figure in starched uniform, clipboard in hand, cigar balanced lightly between fingers. He moved deliberately, inspecting the deck as if walking through a museum rather than a captured enemy vessel. His eyes were sharp but not cruel, assessing not the threat of the men before him but their condition, their readiness to follow orders, and perhaps their humanity. "Gentlemen," he said in accented but clear English, "let us begin with a count and a check of your health." The German sailors exchanged incredulous glances. This was not the encounter they had trained for. Inside the cramped U-boat, weeks of tension still clung to the men's shoulders. They had imagined interrogation rooms, harsh voices, and cold stares. Instead, they were met with calm precision. Orders were given clearly, in measured English, and a smattering of German phrases for clarity. Medical officers moved among them, checking frostbite and exhaustion, offering blankets, rations, and coffee. One young sailor, barely 19, took a trembling sip and whispered, "Is this really happening?" His friend could only nod, still gripping the railing, half expecting a sudden reversal. The Admiral continued his inspection with meticulous attention to detail. He asked questions politely, never condescending, and the Germans were shocked to find themselves treated with dignity rather than suspicion. Historical records note that over 5,000 U-boat sailors surrendered to the Americans in these final days, and not a single incident of lethal reprisal occurred during these operations. For men accustomed to life-and-death decisions measured in seconds, the careful attention to protocol and courtesy was astonishing. As the inspection moved along, subtle acts of human decency left lasting impressions. A medic handed out bandages and fresh socks. An American sailor offered a cigarette to a German whose hands shook from confinement and cold. Officers laughed quietly over minor mistakes in pronunciation. Richter allowed himself a wry smile, the first in months, noting how absurdly peaceful the proceedings were. After months of hiding in steel coffins under depth charges, we get coffee and clean socks, he muttered under his breath. Yet, beneath the calm, the weight of uncertainty lingered. These men had been predators of the sea, trained to evade and destroy, and now they had no weapons, no defenses, and only the honor of compliance to protect them. Every gesture of civility deepened the tension. Could it really be this simple? Could war truly end with protocol and kindness, without a single shot fired in this final theater? For the young sailors, the question was almost dizzying. Personal interactions revealed the human stakes more vividly than any record could capture. One German engineer, eyes wide with disbelief, found himself chatting in broken English with an American counterpart about engine maintenance and patrol routes. Another sailor, who had lost a friend to depth charges days before, allowed himself a hesitant laugh when a medic joked about the quality of German coffee. Moments like these, small and almost ridiculous, carved themselves into memory, bridging years of indoctrination and fear with an unexpected understanding. The tension broke further during the counting and documentation. Names were read aloud, logs checked, details recorded with military precision. Each German sailor repeated his information, voice steadying with every acknowledgement that they were safe, alive, and, astonishingly, respected. The contrast was almost surreal. The most lethal operators of the Atlantic, accustomed to evading death at every turn, now standing in orderly lines, treated with patience and courtesy. Even the environment underscored the contradiction. The sea was calm, the fog lifting in patches to reveal a pale sun, the smells of salt and diesel intermingling with a faint aroma of coffee and bread. Machines that had hummed with menace were silent, their lethal potential temporarily suspended by procedure and protocol. For the Americans, the task was simple yet exacting. Enforce surrender, maintain order, and treat prisoners humanely. For the Germans, it was a psychological paradox. Survival delivered not by cunning or violence, but by adherence to rules and the civility of an enemy. The day progressed with routine, yet every moment carried weight. The Admiral's quiet authority, the orderly precision of the American sailors, and the strange comfort of food, blankets, and medical care reshaped the German crew's perception of what surrender could be. Some began to glimpse the absurdity of their prior fears. Others, still wary, measured every gesture, every glance, as if expecting the world to revert to its violent logic at any second. Even humor, subtle and ironic, found its place. One German whispered to a comrade, "We've survived torpedoes, depth charges, and enemy planes. And now the most dangerous weapon is a polite officer asking if we need more tea." Laughter, quiet and nervous, rippled along the deck. It was the kind of relief born from tension, the humor of those who had faced death only to be offered civility in its stead. By evening, the surrender process was largely complete. The German sailors had stepped fully into a world that was orderly, measured, and surprisingly humane. They had learned painfully and gradually that war did not have to strip all dignity from those who fought it. Even in defeat, they were treated as men, not merely as enemies. Richter looked over the calm sea, reflecting on the strange contradiction of the day, months of fear, aggression, and survival distilled into an encounter defined not by violence, but by courtesy and precise procedure. In the fading light, U-2501 lay tethered, no longer a predator, but a relic, its crew alive, aware, and quietly astonished. They had crossed from the depths of war into a space where discipline and humanity coexisted, and though relief mingled with lingering tension, the memory of civility would linger far longer than the memory of fear. For these men, the Atlantic had delivered a lesson in unexpected kindness, proof that even amid steel, smoke, and war, human decency could survive. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across deck and hull, they understood. In a world defined by conflict, sometimes civility itself could be the most shocking force of all.